Hey guys, hey, this is Anne Marie and this is the Anti-HR channel. On this channel, I talk about all kinds of things, but primarily workplace issues, information to help you better understand your workplace rights and to know how to assert your rights if you believe they're being violated. So if that's of interest to you, give me a like, subscribe, comment, but please do so, you know what I'm going to say, constructively. So y'all, I've been thinking a lot about this, the Sean Combs trial. And I feel like I commented about it when the story first broke. And I really wasn't planning to say much about it. But it's hard to get away from because it's all over social media. I really avoided watching the video. And I avoided again watching it today. But it was impossible to avoid the information about the contents of Cassie Ventura's testimony. And I posted something about some of my thoughts about it on YouTube. But here's just a summary of what I'm thinking about it. And I'm really thinking about this, yes, in the context of work. Because the reality is, Sean Combs was not just an entertainer. He was also an employer. And a lot of the things that was happening to Cassie Ventura was happening all around people who worked for him. People who worked for him had awareness of what he was doing. In her testimony, she talked about sending communications to his assistants, and that his handlers and different people that worked for him, security people who literally chased her down and brought her back when he was abusing her and she ran away. All of these people were his employees. And what it says is that, in work environments, they're victims, and there are lots of multiple levels of victims, right? And I mean, a lot of people are just, I've seen people already say, we want the names of these people and they should be held accountable and whatever. And that's one take. But I also understand that a lot of times in work environments that are toxic and hostile and abusive, there are people who are directly being abused, and then there are people who are the observers of the abuse who are secondarily being abused. Because what often happens, it's like Stockholm Syndrome, is that, especially when you're dealing with, powerful people, but, this happens in regular work environments, right? Some of these things that people see the abuse. Someone's being abused, verbally being abused and castigated and treated horribly. And other people watch it and do nothing. Some people might even help, right? Not necessarily engage in it, but are bystanders to it, right? And do not act because they're afraid. And the whole point of bullying and engaging in abusive behavior in workplaces is to instill fear so that you can get away with what you're doing and what you want to do. And so, when people say things like, why didn't she leave? My thing is, you won't even leave an abusive job and you want to ask why she didn't leave? And as someone who, I studied domestic violence in the law. I actually took a course on domestic violence in the law when I was in law school, and I never forgot what I learned in that course. Because domestic violence, first and foremost, is about power, right? And it is not about, it's about control and power, right? And one person trying to exert control over someone else. And so, and one thing you always learn is that the most dangerous time for a person who is a victim of DV is when they try to leave. Either when they try to leave or right after they actually leave. Most, the biggest demographic who is impacted by DV are women. That's a fact. Majority of women who are unalived, because we're not allowed to use the M word. The algorithm doesn't like it. The majority of women who are unalived in DV situations are those who have either just left, who are trying to leave. When people say, why didn't she leave? You see, if you watch the video, you see what happened when she tried to leave. If you listen to her testimony, you see what happened more than one time when she tried to leave, right? And so, one of the things that I think that we should pay attention to is and understand is that these things not only affect the people that it happens to, it also affects the people who see it, because it's intended to instill fear. And this is the person who is on trial, who was known in that industry as being a problematic person, right? And so people were not just people, there are other people who are afraid of him as well. And there are people who worked for him who are afraid of him. And I'm sure that there's going to be testimony from some of those people as this trial continues. And so I think it is very important for us to understand that there's a personal dynamic to this, but there's also a workplace dynamic to this. And when we want to understand why people didn't do anything, you're going to hear more in the testimony of people who didn't do anything, why they didn't. And yes, in a perfect world, they would have intervened and wrestled him off of her and called the police and all these things. But that's not what happens in the real world. There are people who don't have 2 cents to rub together and barely a pot or a window who are engaging in this behavior. So it's not about how much money he had per se, as much as it is about his ability to instill fear and to exert control. And so in the workplace, you will see people being abused, verbally abused, mentally abused. And they're not only being harmed by what is happening to them, and they don't quit their jobs. There are people who will be in jobs for 18, 20 years being abused and beaten down. And they feel like they're never going to find another job like this one. Because as in all abusive relationships, they're not mean to them all the time. They might promote you one week and then do something else to you the other. And so people are afraid, especially in this job market, right? There are a lot of people who are suffering and afraid to leave their jobs because they're afraid they might not find another job. They might be making, quote, good, unquote, money, right? And they're being treated horribly. And the people who are also working next to them in the cubicle next to them, while they might not be directly being subjected to the abuse, right? But they realize they might be next. And that something bad might happen to them if they speak up. So it's not just the person who is being abused, who's being harmed in these environments. It's everybody. It's everybody. And what is important in these situations is for us to stop looking around for other people to blame besides the perpetrator of the behavior. We are looking at another situation where this woman went into this relationship when she was 19 years old. And I am sorry, but a 19-year-old should not be in a relationship with a 37-year-old man, any more than they should be in one with a 56-year-old. And we have a culture where these men, not just in the entertainment business, men, some of whom are black men aren't the only ones engaging in this, but right now we're talking about a black man, another black man, who are engaging in predatory behavior. And they're targeting girls because they're easier to control at that age. You can groom them. By the time they get to be older, their minds are already conditioned to do whatever it is that you want them to do because you got them when they were very, very young and pliable. Okay? We're dealing and talking about predatory behavior. And we got to stop asking why a person didn't leave a job, why a person didn't leave a person, and instead ask, why did this person think it was okay for them to treat another human being this way? That is the only question that we should be asking, not any other question. And please don't come into my comments to ask any other question, because I will block you with the quickness. I am not going to entertain it. And I will say also that, Cat Williams said last year to Shannon Sharp that there was plenty good, that all will be revealed in 2024. Well, I think that's being extended into 2025. We are going to learn a lot about people. And I'm not talking just about the person on trial. I'm talking about the people in the cubicle next to you, the people at the water cooler, friends and family members, as you listen to people talk about this case, as well as others that are coming up around these same subjects. Chris Brown just got himself arrested for the umpteenth time today. When you hear people talk about these people and take positions where they seek to blame the victim, understand that they're also telling on themselves. And it ain't just men. I've often said there are a lot of men that don't like women. There are a lot of women that don't like women either. There are a lot of black women that don't like other black women. That's part of the reason why we can't get where we need to get to, because we have been conditioned to not like ourselves and to not like each other. And a lot of us are telling on ourselves right now as this trial unfolds. And we only like, a couple days in. And folk out here telling on themselves. And when people tell you who they are, in the words of the good ancestor Maya Angelou, believe them the first time. And people are revealing themselves. They're revealing who they truly are, what their true natures are. All these men that you see talking about how she could have left and she really liked it. You know why they think that? Because they would like to be able to do the same thing and might be doing the same thing to somebody else's child, somebody else's daughter and sister and cousin. And so, of course, what's the big deal? People telling on themselves. Women who are in these social media comments beating this woman up and talking about what they would have done and what they wouldn't have done. And some of them are getting their asses beat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, quiet as it's kept, by somebody that barely has a pot or a window, but they want to talk about what they would do. People are going to be telling on themselves. Pay attention. Pay attention. And it might be people that you thought you knew. They're going to tell you who they really are and what they really believe, right? Who the core of them is. Just listen to the things that people say, because I'm beginning to think, one of the questions that I often ask people when I meet them is, who did they vote for in the last election? And the next question might be, what do you think about the Diddy trial? What's your take on it? It might be very enlightening, right? So I do think that, as we watch this unfold, you're going to learn a lot of things, but it's also, there's a workplace dynamic to it, because this man was an employer. And he had people working for him who were abetting and aiding in this. But I'm not necessarily sure that they were doing it because they wanted to do it. And so I think it's easy to say, oh, well, the assistant should have done this, and oh, the assistant should have done that, and oh, the security should have done this, and the security should have done that. And I'm not saying in a perfect world it would have been great for the security guard to refuse to do what he asked him to do. And he probably would have just fired him, blackballed him, and got him somebody else to do it. But it would have been great if somebody else would have, went and stood up and called the police and all of these kinds of things. That would be great. But the reality is that this was an extremely powerful man, inordinately powerful person. And so while it's easy to say that, that's not necessarily realistic. And so while she was a victim, and there are other victims, there are other people who are going to testify, and there are other people who are going to testify to what they saw who were employees, and then there are going to be other people that testify to also being a part of the activities and the shenanigans that he apparently was into, right? And, my thing is, grown people can do whatever they want. But when you're coercing people and forcing people to do things psychologically or otherwise, that's a different conversation. And so as this unfolds, we're going to learn more about how far this went, the reach of it all. But I think it's also important it helps you understand how it is that people can work in environments where they're being abused and mistreated and not leave. And I've had conversations with people all the time. I've had conversations with people who've been at jobs for long times, and maybe they were not being sexually abused, but they were still being abused, mentally abused, like mentally broken, self-esteem in the toilet after working with certain types of people for long times. And people who are narcissists, people who are sociopaths, exhibit behaviors in different ways, right? And so, it shows up in lots of different ways, but they're patterns, right? And so I think it's really important to get the lessons, as well as to realize that people are going to also reveal their character to you over the next several weeks. And you should pay attention to that too. And it's not just going to be public figures. It's going to be people in your office, people in your personal life, might even be the person laying in the bed next to you. Right? Pay attention. Stuff is going to be revealed. But I also think it's a time to really kind of have a better understanding about how these things can happen, and to have some empathy. And if you can't have empathy, then just give people grace and withhold judgment, and stop thinking you know what you would do if you were in that situation. If you've never been in an abusive relationship, be happy about it. And abusive relationships aren't just where people put their hands on you. It usually starts off psychological stuff, because people usually want to see what they can get you to do before it even escalates into violence. So people love to talk about what they would do and what they wouldn't do, but they have no clue about what they would do. You have no idea what you would do unless you are in it. And so now is a time to not be judgmental. Now is a time to extend grace and empathy. And I just pray. I have prayed for Cassie Ventura before, and I continue to pray for her now. I think she's a hero. I think she's a very brave woman. I pray for her. I pray for the child that she is carrying. I pray for her other children. I pray for her husband. And I just hope that one day her kids are going to know about this. She has 2 young daughters. And I really believe that part of what caused her to take the actions that she did in 2023 is because she was finally in a healthy relationship with a man that loves her, and she has children, and she has daughters. And the reason I believe her, and the reason I personally believe that Sean Combs deserves to be in prison, the fact that he has his daughters in the courtroom listening to this tells me that he's a narcissist. A person that cared about their children would not have their children in court just to make them look like a good parent, would not have their children in court listening to this. Even if it wasn't true, they wouldn't want their children there. The fact that he wants his children there for the optics and doesn't care enough about his daughters to not have them be there listening to this stuff tells me everything I need to know about him. Even if I didn't already know that she's probably telling the truth. Because as I said, if you know anybody in entertainment business, this man's reputation has never been stellar. And I'll just leave it at that. And I absolutely didn't know anything about this stuff, but I did know that he was not necessarily a good person in terms of the music business. So finding out that he was an even worse human being than I could have possibly imagined is not particularly shocking to me, because he didn't have a stellar reputation in the music business. It's just that, he's a very powerful person, so people never publicly talked about him and talked about, how he did business and so on. All of that stuff is coming out now. But these kinds of things, I'm not shocked by any bad thing that people do. Because the music business is a business that's predatory. The reason that they love, people start out in this business young is because you can take advantage of people when they're young. They're not trying, and it's a business that needs youth, right? Because you catch people when they're young, you take advantage of them. By the time they understand the business, they're aging out of it, right? And you've already used and abused them and discarded a lot of them. It's a very predatory business, the entertainment business and the music business specifically. The whole entertainment business is a hot mess, but the music business is just atrocious. So I wasn't, you can't possibly imagine these things, but when I heard it, I wasn't shocked by it at all. But when I started hearing the details of it, my heart is broken for her. It really and truly is. My heart is broken for her. She met this man when she was 19 years old. 19. Okay? And was with him for almost 10 years. And all of these things that was happening over all this time. It's horrific, in my opinion. And so I just pray for her mental well-being. I pray for her unborn child. I pray for her. I pray that when her children are older and old enough to understand these things, that they will recognize that their mother is a hero and understand what she did and why she did it. Because frankly, $20 million is not enough, in my opinion, for what she went through. It's not enough money. So I don't believe she did it for the money, because if she did it for the money, it would have been a whole lot more money, frankly, and should have been a whole lot more money. And so, I personally hope that he ends up underneath the jail. Actually, I don't even want him underneath the jail. I want him underneath the part that's underneath the jail, right? That's where I believe he belongs. But who knows how this is going to go? Because he's got a majority of men on the jury. So who knows how this is going to go? And I was reading that the reason that there's so few women on the jury is that they couldn't find women that could say that they had not been victims of DV or some type of abuse, because majority of women have experienced some type of abuse at the hands of a partner or a romantic partner or something like that. It's an unfortunate reality that as women, every single one of us has had some kind of unfortunate, most of us have had some kind of unfortunate interaction with romantic partners. Sometimes once if you're lucky, multiple times if you're not. And some of us have been through horrific things and are probably very triggered, not just by this video, but by this whole thing that's happening. And so I would say that if you are a person who has been a victim of DV, guard the windows of your soul, as my late mother would say. Guard the windows of your soul. Try as much as possible to not watch any of this stuff, to not consume it. I personally have not been watching the daily coverage. I did hear some things today. I read certain things, and then I had to stop because it was just too much. It's too much. Just watching the pictures of her going into the courthouse and then seeing the illustrations and that she's 8.5 months pregnant, it pains me that she has to even be up there testifying. And I just think she's incredibly brave to do so. And so I just hope that for those who cannot be empathetic, try to give some grace. And if you can't do that, remember that shutting up is free. Shutting up is free. Silence is not only golden, it's free. It don't cost you nothing to keep your comments to yourself. And so I say, as usual, there is no democracy in my comment section, especially when it comes to this topic. So if you are a victim blamer, if you don't have anything positive to say, if you don't have anything worthwhile to say, I suggest that you exercise the silence is golden rule, because y'all know I always got time to hit the delete and block button. And so those are my thoughts on this topic. I don't plan to discuss it again unless something really wild comes up. But I do think you should look out for the workplace dynamics in it, because I think there are really huge lessons about the impact of abuse on not just directly on victims, but on the bystanders, on the people who are observing it. I know for a fact that there is secondary harm that people experience just from seeing abuse and being witnesses to it, right? And so I really want us to keep the focus on who the perpetrator and the primary wrongdoer is in this, and who the victim is in this, and to not try to deflect from that by trying to place blame on other people, and instead put the blame where it belongs, but also learn and understand how these dynamics work. And this is not me saying that people didn't have a responsibility to do more, but I think there are reasons why people don't do more, right? When people know that someone has the power to blow somebody's car up and not suffer any consequences, it might also make you keep your mouth shut. So I think we need to extend grace and empathy to not just to Miss Ventura, but to all of the people who are involved, because there are more people coming who are going to have more to say and more stories to tell. So I hope this video is helpful. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please comment constructively. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.